Every day is a good day to talk about women's basketball, and today is no different. Legendary Kansas women's basketball coach Marian E. Washington is here to talk all about her book, Fierce, My Fight for Nothing Less, what she hopes people are able to learn from her book and from her generation's impact on the game, as well as all about her athletic career. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Friday. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm host Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Women's Basketball, welcome. We at The Next have over 100 reported pieces every single month. We have a beat reporter on every single WNBA team, one on more than 15 different NCAA beats, so get that YouTube subscription up. And you can also support us by subscribing to The Next for $9 a month or $72 a year at thenexthoops.com. Today, I am joined by Marian E. Washington to talk about her book, Fierce, My Fight for Nothing Less, what she hopes people are able to learn from her book and from her generation's impact on the game, as well as all about her athletic career. This book goes from her childhood in Westchester, Pennsylvania, to what she is doing now in retirement and everything in between. I truly enjoyed reading this book and hope all of our listeners enjoy listening to this special two-part podcast and think about picking up this book for themselves. Joining me today is Marian E. Washington, former Kansas women's basketball head coach and author of the book, Fierce, My Fight for Nothing Less. And speaking of that book, Marian, how long have you been wanting to write a book, and what made now the right time to release it?
Well, Natalie, throughout my career, at different points, people would come up to me and suggest that I write my book. And when you're involved with coaching, you don't think about it, and it wasn't until actually my daughter pushed me to make sure that my history was accurate. And so at 78, I decided to make sure that I told my story myself. I'm a great grandmother now, and it would be very nice for them to know exactly how I contributed to the program at the University of Kansas.
Yeah, and that's not just the only thing that you wrote about. You really wrote from your childhood up until what you're doing now. Did you enjoy walking down memory lane to write about, everything from your childhood and your early coaching days?
Later on in your life, you'll know how difficult it might be. It was definitely difficult for me trying to remember everything. And then when I did, it was hard to put things into words, but I wanted to be as truthful as I could and as accurate as I could. There was a lot of things that was going through my mind at the time, of course, trying to celebrate how hard my family worked and, of course, the history that I was a part of relative to women's basketball.
And what was your favorite part of writing the book?
I don't know if there was a favorite part. I'm just happy to know that I was a part of it, especially, during the Title IX era, early years. That was a difficult time. And when you're young, you work hard, you go through it. You don't really realize some of the challenges that you actually faced and got through. So as I was writing my book, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, thank goodness I was young at the time because there was a lot of challenges. I think it was really enjoyable for me to talk about some of my players. Most definitely my family. We'll start out with that, my family. When you are older, you want to have a legacy that you can leave. And I feel like I have one, and I think that my children and my great-grandchildren will enjoy learning more about it.
And you've talked a little bit about this, but, was there an easiest and hardest part of writing the book?
Yeah, I think the early part of my life, I had raised my daughter by myself. I I enjoy watching some of the young coaches on the sideline, and the fact that they're raising young children. I know what that was all about for me, and it's not always easy. And I think just reliving my own athletic experiences, because I think that's what drove me to get more involved in athletics. I wanted to be an Olympian, and God had a way of moving myself through a path that took me through a lot of different eras. And I had a chance to play for some really wonderful women.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get to your playing career in the Olympics as well. Um, how long did it take you to write this book?
There was a time limit. I wish I had a couple of years, but we got it done in less than a year. And it was, again, very important that we were clear as to what we wanted to achieve. I'm very fortunate to have a co-writer in Vicki Freeman. She did a great job. It was important for me to be able to be free in sharing, some of my deepest concerns, and be able to have it in a way that people can read it and maybe be inspired by some of it. And she did a great job for me.
Yeah, I was definitely inspired reading it. Was there anything that you learned along the way?
Well, there's a lot of firsts. And again, when you are experiencing all this, you don't think about it. I didn't realize that I was one of the first two Black women to ever be on a U.S. national team. I didn't realize that I was the first Black coach at a predominantly white institution. I didn't realize any of that, but now that, uh, it's in writing and it's a fact, it's really kind of exciting for me.
Were you able to take a moment throughout that writing process as you learned those facts and where you were one of the first, if not the first, and, take a step back and celebrate that and, enjoy how much of a part of history you were?
Well, my daughter does a lot of celebrating. And my co-writer did a lot of celebrating, and she did a great job in researching, because what was also very important for me is that we were accurate. There were so many Black women coaches at predominantly at historically Black institutions that really they were there early. They contributed to our game, but they never really got recognition. So I wanted to be sure, if I was the first to be a part of a white institution, then let's document that. And all of those things were very meaningful for me.
Coming up next, we'll talk about what Marian hopes people are able to learn from her book and women's basketball history. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode is brought to you by Apostrophe. I've struggled with self-confidence as I've been planning my wedding over the last year, but I've prioritized taking care of myself and being kind to myself, and over time have grown to love myself more than I have in years. One of the biggest things that can lead to a lack of self-confidence is your skin, and that's why we're excited to partner with Apostrophe, the sponsor of this episode. Just fill out an online consultation with your skin goals and medical history, take a few selfies, and a dermatology provider will create a customized treatment plan for you. Apostrophe offers access to prescription treatments for all types of acne. I also love the cute postcards and personalized stickers on the prescription bottles. We have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/lockedon when you use our code LOCKEDON. That's a savings of $15. This code is only available to our listeners. To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/lockedon and click Get Started. Then use our code LOCKEDON at sign up and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Thank you, Apostrophe, for sponsoring this episode. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There is no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. And we'll dive more into your experiences as we continue talking, but what do you hope people are able to learn or take away from your book?
Well, let's begin with what young people today, some young people go through. There's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of challenges. There are a lot of young people that are experiencing some very harsh realities, whether it's molestation or it's just discrimination. I would hope that they might be encouraged to continue the fight, to continue believing in themselves, and to be encouraged that things will work out. And then I think as a mother, it's important that we understand that we have a lot to bear, but we can fulfill some of our dreams. And, the whole book is to be an encouragement to, different people with different situations. I believe that God drove me, guided my journey. And so my spiritual life, I'm hoping that might impact some people. As a coach, I coached at a time when we had to, rely on a few players, a few good players, and a lot of walk-ons. And so there were a lot of years when I did not have a lot of scholarship players. And yet those young people were committed to the University of Kansas. They were committed to me, and they really played well and helped our program become a nationally recognized program. As an athletic director, I was the first and only athletic director at the University of Kansas. And to think about having to build that program, and when I say build it, Natalie, I'm talking about going into a facility that had nothing but a women's bathroom in it, to have to put up walls for our coaches, to put up, to build locker rooms, to find a way to get money so that the women from sport to sport did not have to pass the same uniforms down to each other. There's so many things that that I cover in the book. It's also important that women's basketball will know more about the history of their sport and to celebrate the history of their sport. Keep the past in the present. There are a lot of athletes that really, if it had not been for them, we wouldn't be where we are today. A lot of coaches that went without pay. Carol Ekman, my college coach, understand, prior to Carol Ekman in 1969, there was no national tournament for college women. We had to compete in AAU, the senior division. And she decided in 1969 that she was going to have the very first national championships. Most people don't know about her. Most young people out there don't know about her. Most players that are playing in these celebrated, wonderful national championships, they don't know about Carol Ekman, and they should. As we know, Naismith, we should know Carol Ekman. Had not for her, this might not have been. People like Alberta Lee Cox that integrated the first national team in '69. That made a big difference in my career, and certainly for future women. If there's any one thing outside of my coaching and administrative experiences, I would say that I'm really proud of the fact that I helped to bring about a change in the U.S. Olympic basketball policies for women's basketball. I had noticed for years the staff of color were mostly managers, and I felt that every staff that went out representing the U.S., no matter what level, should have an African American on the coaching staff. And so they agreed and changed the policy. And then in 1996, I became a member, the first Black coach on an Olympic coaching staff, which was truly a surprise, but a great honor.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about that more later. I loved learning more about your Olympic journey. Before we dive into that, I just want to talk about in the opening pages of your book, there's a Dawn Staley quote that mentions the importance of not forgetting about those who open doors. What do you hope that younger people are able to learn about you and the impact of you and the rest of your generation on basketball?
Well, I often talk about the fact that when you watch some of the commercials that the NBA will feature, you will see a piece on Bob Cousy. And Bob Cousy was one of those players, I believe he played for Boston, and he was known for his one-hand push shot. And they will have footage on him. And of course, some of the other greats you will know from the past, know their names, know how celebrated they've been. We as women in women's basketball, we need to be very proud of our history. And unfortunately, I think that with the NCAA taking the women's championships over, they have failed us. They failed in bringing our history along. And because of that, you don't have a lot of names, a lot of institutions. Old Dominion won 3 national championships. Louisiana Tech, they used to be the Connecticut of women's basketball. Great players like, of course, Lynette Woodard and Denise Curry. My goodness, well, of Annie Myers, but there are names of athletes that were just outstanding. And had it not been for them, our game is built on their shoulders. And our coaches, like I mentioned earlier, we got to know the names of coaches like Carol Ekman and Alberta Lee Cox, because they gave of themselves. They either forfeited salaries, or they gave from their own bank accounts, where they were able to support some of the teams that went out representing our country. And it's the very least that we can do. But I think the thing that is important to me is that we, all of us in the media, our young coaches today, and certainly our athletes, that we begin to know the history of our sport and that we celebrate it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's been one thing that I've loved doing over the last few years is, as a young person, learning more about that history. Coming up next, we'll talk about Marian's athletic career. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Growing up, I loved learning new things and always had my nose in a book. But as an adult, I just don't make time to learn new things like I used to, and I feel like I've lost that sense of wonder. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back to school era can come at any age. Going to therapy has been so helpful for me, especially as I've gone through a lot of life transitions over the last year. I've learned many positive coping skills, as well as how to set boundaries, but it's also empowered me to be the best version of myself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. So kind of switching gears and going back in history for you, how did you get your start playing basketball?
Well, first of all, I think that I was always excited about competing. It didn't matter what I did. If you read the book, you'll know that whether it was running or jumping or driving a car faster than my brother, it was always, I always enjoyed a competitive situation. When I went to high school, I played basketball, but it wasn't a sport that a lot of people got behind. You know, today we have girl dads. And I mentioned in my book that my father, I believe, was one of the first girl dads because he did support me in every way. But it wasn't until, so track and field really was my sport because I could do more. I could compete at a higher level. But it wasn't until I got to college that basketball seemed to then take off for me. And once that happened, I tried to focus on it.
And you, as you talked about, you were involved in a lot of sports over the years, but how do you think being a multi-sport athlete helped you either in life or as you continued playing basketball?
Well, knowing and appreciating a lot of different sports certainly helped me as an administrator because, I was responsible for a lot of our women's programs at Kansas, and I knew some about each of those sports and was excited about most of all of them. I think the downfall of being good in a number of different sports is that I never got a chance to really specialize. In track and field, I was a discus thrower. I was a shot putter, but the discus took over pretty much. And at those days, they didn't have really good, strong field event coaches. So I never had a chance to really get that kind of coaching. In basketball, I think probably I had my greatest success, but then I also played team handball. It was just, an invitation that I received. I didn't think much of it, ended up making a team. Didn't know it, again, didn't know much about the sport. Had I maybe been younger, to have been able to spend more time, I love the sport. I think that I might have gotten pretty good at it. But I was good enough to make the teams. So,
And how would you have described yourself as a basketball player?
I think I was very competitive. There's no question about that. I think I was fierce on the court. I loved rebounding. I was blessed with, I think great leaping ability for my height, and I love defense. Uh, as a coach, it was something that I always emphasized: love defense, and just the tougher the competition, the more I was excited about, and to compete in the world championships at that time. It was equivalent to the Olympic Games in 1971 in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I had a chance to compete against some of the best teams in the world. So for me, it was just a sport that just gave me the greatest thrill and satisfaction, and allowed me to really, I guess, fulfill some of my greatest dreams.
And, specifically your time playing at Westchester State College, can you just talk about that, especially winning the first Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics for Women championship in 1969?
Sure, Natalie. First of all, when I was with Carol Ekman, when we went to try for the senior division of AAU, we had to go to Washington D.C. To compete in the regionals there, and it was really different because college schedules at that time were very limited. I don't know that we played more than a dozen games. So to go to DC to play in the regionals to try to qualify for the senior division, we had to play against club teams. We had to play against women that were much older than us and certainly much more experienced. And so when we had a chance to compete in a national championships of college women. Our team was the kind of team that truly believed in each other, and we believed that we were going to win from the very beginning. And it was so important because we knew how hard Carol Ekman worked. But when we stepped on that court, uh, there was no second guessing about what we were going to try to accomplish. And so to be the very first championships of that national tournament, again, it's another honor for me, and hopefully something that my family will cherish.
Awesome. And it was interesting to read about in the book that you played the Rover game when you were at Westchester State College. Can you, for the listeners, explain how that worked and what that transition was like to when you switched to playing the more traditional 5-on-5 game we know today?
Right. The Rover game, we went from half court. Our women's game changed so much. We went from half court to finally the Rover game, which gave teams an opportunity for two players to be able to play both offense and defense. So you had two players that crossed the half court line, and you could have been either a rover or you could have been a defensive player on one end and an offensive player on the other end. I was an offensive player, and our rovers they were able to certainly play defense, but bring the ball back to you as an offensive player. Um, when I tried out for the national team in '69, I had to be prepared for the five-player game. So prior to going to that tryout, I actually stopped at a camp in Iowa, Denison, Iowa, where a camp was being held teaching the five-player game to the women. And I spent a week doing that. So when I got to the tryouts, I was definitely, I think, ready to go, uh, excited. It's the only game you ever saw on TV anyway. And so going abroad, found it very interesting because you had teams that only played the five-player game. All the women's teams from the other countries, that's all they played, was the five-player game. And I found out also that a lot of fans were in support of women's basketball in other countries, more so than in our country. And I never found that it was difficult to make that transition. I was just always happy that it finally happened in this country.
And how do you think the CIAW and AIAW impacted basketball as we know it today?
Well, it was our, governing bodies. The NCAA fought not to have us, not to support us. And so what did we have? We only had ourselves. And so had not been for these two governing bodies, again, we wouldn't be where we are today. Um, and I really appreciate what AIAW was able to achieve. Again, it's a situation where we need to know more about what happened during those days, what kind of championships we had, the athletes that came through that era, and um, help our young people know more about these names. I was talking to someone about Nero White. I don't know if you know that name, but Nero White was an AAU player that was named 19 times All-American, and she played for um, a business college.
Mhm.
And if I mentioned Nero White to almost anyone, they would not know who she was, and that's again a kind of a sad situation. She was an outstanding athlete, obviously.
Yeah, that is one name that I learned last year. I was able to cover the preview of If Not For Them, where I learned a lot more about the AAU circuit and really inspired me to do more of my own research. So that's one thing that I think myself and everyone listening to this should just continue to learn and keep doing the research and finding out more about basketball before we know it today, because not only is it really interesting, it's really important history as we continue to talk about basketball's continued growth today.
Yes, and I applaud you. I'm so happy that someone like yourself in the position that you're in had a chance and to appreciate our
Mhm.
history, and you're giving your audience an opportunity to learn more. It's fun. I mean, if you find out about some of these incredible athletes, you just I think will enjoy, or they will enjoy reading about them. For me, when I was very young, the only athletes that I knew of was Althea Gibson
Mhm.
in tennis. She was the only athlete that had a book in a library that I was able to find that told me about her
Mhm.
story. And then, of course, Wilma Rudolph was the athlete that just um, stirred my desire to really become an Olympian. And you want to know about her and her story, how she overcame, her physical challenges.
Yeah, libraries are great, and that is how I mean, I grew up with it on TV. I told you this offline. I went to my first UConn game at 6 months old. So I'm just one example of how important it is to be able to see women's basketball on TV and in person, and have that love for the game and covering the game grow up with that.
That's awesome. Again, I'm just so excited for young people like yourself.
Thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Now go check out the Locked On NBA podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to tune in tomorrow to hear from our WNBA draft crew, and make sure to tune in on Monday to hear all about Marian E. Washington's coaching career, her time at Kansas, and her journey to the Olympics in 1996.